This court is now resumed. You may be seated.
I apologize for that delay, counsel. Still working on my issues.
Justice Hennessy, I wanted to bring us back to a commitment I made before the break to sort out the source for Professor Kirzner's calculation of the average rate of inflation on Exhibit 42, the Booth-Kirzner Report Figure 1 augmentation. And it's neither spreadsheet 4 nor 7, it's actually spreadsheet 3. So I apologize for that. Aaron.
Spreadsheet 3, I access.
It was certainly provided electronically.
Is it a named, a numbered exhibit that has another name?
Yes, I believe it's 1-2103. There's a series scheduled 1 through 7 or 2105. No, 2101 and following.
It's being filed though as an exhibit.
Yes.
But the revised version. So these spreadsheets, there are 7 of them that are part of the Booth-Kirzner report, and they were filed on case lines, filed with the court, and included in the joint book of documents, as my friend has noted. But we have earlier today, Professor Kirzner explained that he made some changes to spreadsheets 3 and 6 because he discovered these 8 years that needed a change in the inflation rate. So we have a new spreadsheet 3 and a new spreadsheet 6. We've provided those electronically to the court staff. I don't know whether or not you've received a copy, but they've been provided to the registrar.
I'll work with the registrar.
Okay, thank you.
So did you want to mark them as an exhibit?
The
New ones?
revised spreadsheets? I guess we should then. Thank you for that. Mr.
Yeah, you should. Maybe
Factor.
my suggestion would be to mark it as a 0.2 in the series or
So we would go back to the original joint book of documents number and then
just a 0.2 that would, any reader reading it 40 years from now.
we'll
twig
remember
into the
why.
point that it's
That's a very good idea. So
one of them is 1-2103. Oops, 2107.
and spreadsheet 6, I apologize, I don't have it myself. 2110. So we would then mark the revised spreadsheet 3 1-2107
everything. Doesn't matter.
we've had this problem before. 0.2. We don't actually have a 0.1, but I think it would make sense to call it 0.2.
Okay. Sorry, was it 2110? You say?
That's spreadsheet 6
So the revisions will be on.
on both 2107 and 2110. Because one is spreadsheet 3, the other spreadsheet 6.
Oh, and each of them will be 0.2.
That's correct.
Thank you.
So we now have the new spreadsheet 3 will be 1-2107.2.
1-2, sorry. I just didn't hear you.
1-2107.2.
Thank you.
And spreadsheet 6, the new spreadsheet 6 will be exhibit 1-2110.2. Thank you. Professor Kirzner, before we get back into your slides, I wanted to bring you back to your report, which again is exhibit 38. And I want to turn to page 31. So it's the original report, exhibit 38 at page 31. And at the bottom of page 31, you're discussing the band trust account statement summaries that you used. And on the following page 32, you discuss post 1957. And I had asked you earlier, why did you not use band trust account statements summaries post 1957? And you had answered that you weren't able to find readily available summaries. But I see there in your report, you have another answer as well, a further answer. Can you tell us about that?
Well, we also discovered this with other bands as well, that by it seems that somewhere around 1957, bands in general stopped using the trust accounts, or there was very little activity in the trust accounts, and they were using other avenues. So there's very little trust account data that we found reliable.
All right.
We didn't
thank
have the summaries though either, but
you. Okay, thank you.
Or did you have a paragraph reference on it?
Yes, on paragraph 31 was the lead in to, page 31 was the lead in to page 32. The paragraph reference is really paragraph 84 sub C.
Thank you.
C like Charlie there. Which indicates why band trust account statements are less reliable after 1957. I'm just going to ask the registrar for the purposes of the online. Okay,
just
we've
got
done. All right, thanks. We're just trying to improve the visual screen, but that's been done. Thank you. All right, so moving back to your demonstratives, Professor Kirzner, your slide deck. I see now that we were going to go to slide 65. The next couple of slides are an example from your spreadsheets using 1880. And I think we had discussed that it may not be necessary to go
no,
through
it's
this
right
level
in
of
the,
detail.
it's right in the report. I just reproduced it from the report, and I think that, anyone who wants to could work through it very easily.
Okay, shall we jump ahead then? I think it will be hard for the reporter to capture anyway, a lot of numbers, but shall we jump ahead then to slide 68 shows us on the agenda that we're now into the last section, which is the model results. And are we ready then to go through the model results starting at slide 70?
Yes. So, Your Honor, as I pointed out previously, this is just a repeat of the four models that we used, models 1 through 4, with different assumptions about inflation capping and different assumptions about the consumption investment split. This is a repeat of a previous slide, but since I'm not talking about the results, I thought it would be helpful to at least just remind us of the four models that we used.
All right. So then we'll move to slide 71.
So I spent, sorry.
Yeah, you can go ahead. Sorry, that's
Okay.
on slide 71. Thanks. It should be up in front of everyone now.
I spent quite a bit of time explaining multipliers, and I know that the other experts use multipliers as well. Multiplier represents an annual growth rate. And quite simply, and again, the same approach that we used as the plaintiff experts, and I guess if there are any other experts, the product of the multiplier times the amount owed or the amount received provides a future value credit or present value. So each year you multiply the multiplier by the NCRR. That gives you a number. You add up all those numbers, and that gives you the present value number that we're talking about.
Can I just ask in the
Yes.
second bullet point, it says. Sorry, in the second bullet point, you say it represents an implicit compound annual growth rate?
So you can take,
What's this
you can
implicit
take the
mean?
multiplier
Yeah,
and, for example, the multiplier in model 4 for the very first year is 2192, as I recall. And if you take, and I apologize, Your Honor, for using this term, but if you take the 169th root of that 2192, you will get that 4.66
Model 4.
percent number. It's the annual compound growth rate equivalent to the long-term multiplier.
so we remember when 21, is it 2192 or 2129?
Mm,
So I think it's 2192 as I recall. was
Okay,
my- was my
So if we
multiplier.
take the 2192 number to the 169th power, then we get the 4.66%. I don't know how
I'm
that.
just gonna rephrase it slightly.
Please,
If I take
Mhm.
1.04, 1.06, what's it, 66 to the power of 169, I will get 2192.
it might be helpful to look back at slides 31 and 32. Because that's where you get your 2192.
Yep.
There we are, yeah.
That's the 4.66.
so the 169th root is.
All right, so back to slide 71. I just wanted to ask you then, from what you've told us, so if the net crown resource revenues in any one year were to change, would that have the effect of changing all of your numbers?
No, if the NCRR changes in a given year, it only changes that year. If the rate of return changes in a given year, it will affect the multiplier and affect all of the years. But not if the NCRR number, let's say for 1980, changed from one number to a different number, then the bring forward number for that year would change, but not the other.
But if the bring forward number for that year changes, and then you take that number to compound then all the way through the future, is it not going to
No,
change all the
no.
numbers?
No, it's the rate of, if the rate of return numbers change, then all of the multipliers change, but not if you simply change 1 year of NCRR.
But I'm not
Is-
talking about,
Oh, well, aren't NCRRs one of the factors?
So
Oh,
it's,
oh, no, sorry, go ahead. Maybe I'm lost.
yeah, I was going to say, Professor Kirzner. So, for example, when Mr. Hutchings gave us his numbers in July, you came up with certain totals. Then he changed his numbers. The nominal went down from 1.1 billion to 1.064 billion. You had to run your models again with the new net crown resource revenue numbers, and the models spit out a different number.
that's because some years changed.
Okay,
The years that Mr. Hutchins revised his numbers would affect the bring forward number, but for that year only. But since. when you take
and
the
then when
sum-
you,
Let's say there were 8 years he changed, just for argument's sake. So when you take the sum, you're gonna get a new sum,
thank you,
but it's not multiplicative.
I
So
see.
That's,
And this gets to your third bullet point on this slide 71, where you say each year, the future value credit for that year is added to the cumulative value of the previous year to get the cumulative value for the current year. So you're adding up each year's,
that's. what
NCRR,
you're adding up
present
each
value.
year.
Sorry, I'm not getting the answer to your question. Got the quote.
so you're adding up each year's present value of NCRR.
Yes, you're adding up each year's present value of the NCRR to get the grand total present value of the NCRR.
Thank you. So if we were,
Can I just see if I understand that? So you said if you change an NCRR, it only changes that year. So that's one in a sum. But
Yeah.
it's, if you change the multiplier, that's a factor applying to all, so it changes everything. Or no?
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you.
That is correct, Your Honor.
Okay, so let me, so if the NCRRs change in a given year, that year's number will change. And that's one number out of 169.
That's
It's in a list of sums to be added up.
exactly correct.
Okay, thank you.
The point being then,
Did I
Professor-
get you off track?
no, that's fine.
Okay, sorry.
The point being then, Professor Kirzner, that if the court is to determine, or another expert is to testify that NCRRs should be different than those provided to you by Mr. Hutchings, your cumulative total is going to change.
Yes, it will.
Thank
Yes, it will.
Okay, so I think we're on slide 72 then.
So this is just a repeat of what I said previously, of that each year calculate the bring forward amount of the NCRR, and then I provide a sample for Model 4. I don't,
Shall we turn to that then?
yes.
The sample, which is
the
Slide 73?
sample is on the next page.
Sure, we'll go to 73 then.
So there's our 2192 number again. Okay, this time it's two more significant digits, but that's a 2192 number for 1850. The NCRR that year was 0, so the bring forward number is 0. The multiplier for 1851 is 2117.703. It's in the spreadsheet. The NCRR that I used that I was given is 1216. And so you multiply the 2117 by 1216 and you get 2,575,127.
Can
You
I
do
stop
that-
you there?
This
So
one-
that 2,575,127 represents the present value of the $1,216 of net crown resource revenues in 1850.
Yes, that's the bring forward number for that year only.
For that year, for that amount, that $1,216.
Exactly right.
Right, and this is using your model 4, and you have other figures for your other
Yes,
models.
so the numbers would be somewhat, not greatly different, but they'd be
Somewhat.
different.
Thank you.
And again, just to emphasize the question that you asked me and Her Honor asked me, if that number 1216 were to change to 1200, you would multiply 1200 by 2,117.703 and get a slightly different number, but nothing else would change.
I
You'd
see.
simply add, instead of adding 2,575,000, you'd add 2,000,005 or whatever it is.
Thank you. So you can continue taking us through. I think you left off at 1852.
Well, there's no use going through every year's, I'm just showing how it works.
Maybe you
Okay.
could take us through though 1855, because here I think we see negative
That
net
was a
crown
negative
reserves.
number, a negative NCRR, so you'd multiply 1843.2645 by minus 601 to give you a present value of minus 1,107,802.
All right, thank you.
So can you remind me, possibly Ms. Evans? In our last witness, was there not an assertion made that they did not, they put values at 0 instead of negatives?
These numbers come from Mr. Hutchings' work,
Right,
and Mr. Hutchings did include negative numbers. If you look at his
Oh.
table 17,
unlike,
Professor Beal.
no, well, I don't know about that.
Yeah,
I didn't
okay.
get it. Unlike either Mintz or,
Professors Minson and O'Riordan had nothing to do with this, had nothing to do with net crown resource revenues. They didn't provide any net crown resource
But-
revenues.
but in their calculations, did they not refer to not using negatives?
I believe the evidence was, if memory serves me correct, that either Mr. O'Riordan or Mr. Mintz criticized Stiglitz and Hutchings for not using negative numbers.
Or not using.
For not using negative numbers, and I put it to them that they did. And I cannot remember their answer.
Yeah.
Oh,
But my friend is conceding the point that in fact they did.
I can clear that up. And you can see it directly in Professor Mintz and Mr. O'Riordan's report. They criticized the fact that another expert in a related case did not use negative numbers. And they said they agreed with Mr. Hutchings in the Robinson Superior report where he did use negative numbers. So Professor Mintz and Mr. O'Riordan were agreeing that you should be calculating, including those negative numbers, and they conceded that yes, indeed, Mr. Hutchings and Professor Stiglitz used negative numbers.
Well, I'm glad that's clear enough. Thank you.
so it's a red herring.
Yes, it's a red herring.
Okay. Sorry about that.
No, that's all right. But just to make it clear then, everybody agrees that in the Robinson Superior Treaty Territory report, Mr. Hutchings and Professor Stiglitz, it really is Mr. Hutchings who did these numbers, did take into account years where there were negative NCRRs. And we really only saw them in the first up to 18, what was it? 70 something, I think.
Thank you. It's helpful just to be reminded of where we are on that.
Right. So then I think we can carry on to slide 74, which is, as I understand it, Professor Kirzner, really the same as slide 73. It's just now you're looking at different years. Is that right?
Yes, I'm just showing how the multipliers come down to a very low number by the time you get to year 2019, because you only have the rate of return for that year. But the approach is still exactly the same. So if I take the year 2016, I take the multiplier of 1.1131587, multiplied by the NCRR of 16,412,000, and I get a present value of 18,269,450.
Right. And this makes intuitive sense because net crown resource revenues that were earned in 2016, the present value of those is not going to be a lot bigger than it was in 2016.
No, of course.
So the
And-
difference will be between 2022 and 2023. Inflation. Sorry. Okay, so
Okay, so I think
got
we're
it.
ready to move on from slide 74.
So this was my, I think, very first slide today, and these were a contrast of the results. Our models 1 through 4 with an average just for comparison. And then the present value of the long-term bond, those who use long-term bond, present value of those if you use BTR, and the present value of the Stiglitz-Hutchings approach. And I've spent a good part of today trying to explain why the results differ. I hope that I've been able to do that, but I just have a few additional comments.
Yeah, and before you do, I just wanted to remind everybody that that we had that correction on this page, that your numbers in the top row were based on Mr. Hutchings' July 2022 net crown resource revenues. We all,
That's right.
right? And those numbers then are based on nominal net crown resource revenues of $1.1 billion.
Yes, that's the number. Yes, I recall that number.
Whereas the other figures in the chart, the average using the long-term bond rate, the band trust account rate, and the Stiglitz and Hutchings 60/40, those numbers are actually based on slightly lower nominal net crown resource revenues.
Yes,
So presumably if you had used the same net crown resource revenue numbers as Mr. Hutchings did, the top row of figures there might be slightly lower then.
it's likely, but I would want to run the numbers just in case there was some anomaly in terms of how it is likely that my numbers would be slightly lower, but
I understand.
But
It would,
could I just check your question? If the question was if you had used Mr. Hutchings' numbers October,
no, from February 2023,
February.
like Mr. Hutchings did.
then
Yes, then the numbers would be likely to be slightly lower. And I understand, Professor Kirzner, that you've said you'd need to actually know
You'd
in
wanna
each
run it just
year.
in case it was some anomaly in terms of how those numbers were, how they changed.
Right. For example, we just saw that numbers that change in the later years are not going to have as big an impact
That's
as
exactly
numbers that
right. So
changed in the
if-
earlier years.
So just to clarify, if the change between his 1.1 billion and 1.06 billion or whatever it was, if most of that was in early years, there might be a very small change in the end results, but you'd want to run it just to make sure.
Okay, can we move on then to slide 76?
So, Your Honor, I started off this morning by talking about the fact that the experts came up with different results. And it's not easy to explain exactly why, but we can see why the results were different. And that's, we use annual trust account spending and rate of return approach. We relied on the actual spending patterns of the bands. We believe that we relied on and developed realistic investment spending activity. And we believe that this approach reflects realistic contingencies.
Okay, I'm just going to see if I've got that. Or you've got it here. No, you don't have it here.
We're on slide 76.
76. Okay, thank you.
Others use the band trust account rate. Some use the long-term government bond rate. We understand a 60-40 balanced portfolio approach. We believe that these approaches, particularly the 60-40, might have been very difficult, if not impossible in some years to implement over much of the period. Professor Booth is going to elaborate on that issue, but you know, to go back to 1850 and 1860s, 1870s, relatively underdeveloped markets at that point, lack of financial advisors available, developing a 60-40 balanced portfolio would have been a huge, if not insurmountable challenge, in my opinion.
When you say that, you are talking about some period of time, but certainly not 20 years ago. Or
I am not
50
talking, no, I'm
or
not
50
talking
years
about
ago.
20. You're absolutely right, Your Honor. I'm
So-
talking,
at some point, you would say that investing in a market with sophisticated investment advisors is unrealistic and impossible. And you use the words over much of that period. Half of it?
you really have to, the market's really, and investment advisors, the first mutual funds that were widely available, 1950s, 1945s, 1950s is really where those markets really began to
You-
develop, and the financial advisors.
You were an advisor to Hoop.
Yes,
When did they start making their money?
I was advisor to Hoop, yes.
When did they start making their money?
Hoop probably goes back 40 or 50 years, I would guess. I can let you know.
No, it's just, I'm just trying to, in a bigger picture, this particular bullet point couldn't be over all of the years, and I wanted a sense of what that was.
You're absolutely right. My view is that modern sort of markets, ability to access those markets, and the presence of investment advisors, and the ability of individuals to deal with investment advisors, build balanced portfolios, use mutual funds, or whatever the case may be, really can be traced to about the 1950s.
Thank you.
If I could just add, Sir John Templeton, for example, is one of the most famous investors, probably one of the key people in the development of mutual fund channels. His first global mutual fund was 1952. And he made that available to investors. It was expensive though. And that you want to add that too, is that if you tried to buy into Templeton's global fund in 1952, you paid a 9% fee to get in.
Thank you, Professor Kirzner. Were there other points you wanted to make on that slide 76?
No, I don't think so, no.
Okay. It looks then that we're at your last slide, slide 77. Can you take us through that caveats?
Well, I think we have some caveats, okay, and I think it's important too, and as I said at the beginning, I would indicate where in terms of guidance, there may be issues to think about as well. So the scale and proportionality factor. Additional amounts that should have been paid to the band was a lot larger than the amount actually paid. Would depend on the wealth of the band, would depend on what the band knew, it would depend on what the band wanted to do, but it's possible that a speculative alternate history for the band that was different from the actual one may very well have developed. So, that alternate trajectory issue has been raised, I think, a number of times. If the band had been given a lot of money, would they have invested in IBM? And well, IBM didn't exist then. Computing devices began in 1917, but they had put all of their money in computing devices in 1917 and see it turn into IBM. That's the speculative alternate history. We simply raise it as something that one has to think about. I think it's also important to look at the bands themselves, to look at their wealth levels, again, speculate on whether an alternate history for such a band might have developed.
And Justice Hennessy asked you earlier, if the bands that are poorer compared to bands that are wealthier will that will presumably spend their money differently. Can you expand on that?
So, and we've said this in previous trials. A very poor band is going to get a low multiplier. That's all there is to it. Since a very poor band would have to spend a good deal on consumption attracts a lower rate of return than other forms of investment. Band had to subsist. That band will end up with a lower multiplier. A wealthier band, I won't name names, but I'm thinking of one in particular that ended up with a casino, okay, and it was a fairly wealthy band to start with, and it would also end up with a higher multiplier because it was in its trust accounts and in its experience was able to invest much more than it consumed. So that's you could call it a paradox, you could call it an anomaly, you call it what you wish, but very poor bands end up getting lower multipliers than wealthier bands.
And we see in this situation where you looked at the trust accounts of 16 bands, including some from the Robinson Huron territory, that
Right.
on average, these bands roughly saved about half in their band trust account and spent or consumed the other half. How are you able to compare that kind of saving and spending ratio with other bands?
I'm not going to make an absolute statement on that. I'm not going to talk about whether they were poor or anything else. All I can do is I can make a comparison to other bands that I've looked at. And these were not the poorest of bands. Is what I can say. I saw quite a few bands that would have been much poorer that spent a lot more in consumption. Whether that translates into them being a poor band or not, that's not my expertise.
Isn't, if I can just ask this, you say a very poor band will end up with a multiplier. Like as
Yes.
if it comes out of the sky, it comes out of a computer, I get it. But it's as if it's endowed with a low multiplier. They're poor, so they get a low multiplier. But another way to say that is, if you're poor, you will not have spending patterns that you would have if you're rich.
That is true.
So if you don't have those spending patterns, why use that as as a basis? Because they would be rich, sure, much, much richer if they had the annuities. So if it's recognized that the poorer the band is, the lower the multiplier will be, why use that multiplier?
Well,
Is
that's,
that a
but that
tough
wasn't the
question?
case here. The case here is I simply use the spending patterns of the band.
Right,
I was simply pointing out that if you have a very, very poor band, it will end up with a very low multiplier. The assumption it had to continue to subsist in the 1920s or 1930s.
right. You're saying none of the bands were poor, but I'm just not sure what that answer was.
Your Honor, I want to be very careful here. I don't feel qualified to say that the bands were, that these bands were poor. I don't feel qualified to say it. I can only say that their spending patterns were, in some cases, these bands did not appear to be as poor as other bands I've looked at, but I'm not going to make an absolute statement and say that these bands weren't poor, because I don't know.
Okay.
It's not within my area.
So you're just saying their spending patterns were their spending patterns,
That's exactly what I'm saying.
and whether they're poor or not. And therefore their spending patterns were their spending patterns. You and various others think that the past is a good predictor of the future on spending patterns.
We think that it's a good indicator. It'd be nice if there was some other indicator, but we think that it's a good indicator. It's sort of an unbiased indicator because we don't know of a better one.
Okay. And you know what? There's a whole team here who does their own cross-examination. I'm very sorry about that. But you'll just see, that's where I've been stuck.
Professor Kirzner, are you ready to go on to the second point then? Or do you have anything more to say? I don't want to cut you off. But...
So, Your Honor certainly recognized this very early from one of the questions she asked me. Trust accounts, in our opinion, are good representatives, but they're in no ways perfect. If you look at, now I've looked at a lot of trust accounts. There are experts that actually look at the original version of the trust account, and they're almost impossible to read. They somehow figure out a way to do it. And firms like Joe and Holmes have been doing this for years and years, and they've become experts at it. I'm good at the next level, and I've looked at, I know I looked at 40,000 different items in one case alone. But sometimes there's missing information. Sometimes you simply see a question mark. Sometimes you see a word that you have to interpret. Sometimes it's clear, and sometimes it's not as clear. And so I'm not going to suggest that taking the trust accounts and treating them as absolute is perfect. It's just that we think that's a very good representation of the spending patterns.
And do you think it's a better representation of applying a consistent rate like the band trust account rate?
We believe that it represents what actually happened, and we believe it represents economic reality. Band trust account rate is useful. It's important for the portion that is saved in the band trust accounts, which should earn the band trust account rate, but individuals can't invest in the band trust account rate over the years. So we don't believe that is a good representative number. We believe that our approach is a supportable one, a good one.
Thank you. And I think then that brings us to the third point.
So this, I think, obviously very important. I've spent a good deal of the day talking about rates of returns and how the experts all had different rates of returns. Even the smallest change in a rate of return results in a significant change in the multiplier. In a very, very early slide, I showed the difference between a 4% average rate of return and a 7.6% rate of return, and the differences were enormous. So certainly changing the rate of return assumptions has a totally material result for the bring forward numbers. There's nothing more important than the rate of return numbers that are used each year.
And just to close off, you had referred to having discussed this before. I think that was on your slide 32. Can we just go back to slide 32? I think this is what you were referring to when you said changing, for example, from
Yeah,
4%.
I said 7.6, I meant 7.2.
Right.
Sorry, so like even take if you take 4.66, the Booth Kirzner model, you get a multiplier of 2191 for that first year. With a 7.2 Hutchings Stiglitz, you get a multiplier of 126,741. That's huge, absolutely huge difference. Even the difference between a 5.01 long-term government bond rate and a 5.316 BTR yields a significant difference.
Professor Kirzner, that brings us to the end of your slides. Was there anything else you wanted to add?
Well, I think I've covered what I hope to cover today, and I hope it's been instructive.
Thank you very much. In fact, those are all of my questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Rankin, were you up?
Your Honor, Ontario has no questions for the witness. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Perhaps we should have a short 5-minute break or 15-minute break. What is the court's preference? And then I can just set up and
Let's start.
I can have a good start on the cross-examination.
Very good. We'll take 15 and go through then.
Yeah.
Work our way through. Thank you.
Your Honor, now,
Oh, good question. You are now not permitted to speak with.
I'm
your
not yet.
counsel. That's
Okay,
right.
thank you.
This court will recess for 15 minutes. Thank you.